What's up guys, and welcome to my release Gilgamesh guide. In this video I'm taking you over everything you do need to know in order to understand and build them, including a kit overview, best Lightcones, best relics and Planar ornaments, main stat and substat goals, and general team building ideas. His basic attack does lightning damage based off his attack to a designated enemy. His skill gives Gilgamesh King's Acknowledgement, letting him ignore 30% of target's defense when doing damage for 3 turns. Deals lightning damage based off his attack to a designated enemy and adjacent targets. His ultimate does lightning damage equal to 400% of Gilgamesh's attack to all enemies with an additional 10 bounce instances, each doing lightning damage equal to 100% of Gilgamesh's attack to a random enemy. His talent gives Gilgamesh King's Burden when a teammate uses ultimate, which increases Gilgamesh's ultimate damage by 40% for 3 turns. Gilgamesh starts the battle only being able to use basic attack automatically. An ally target taking an action will give Gilgamesh 1 point of interest. Each interest point will increase Gilgamesh's speed by 10%. Reaching 10 interest for the first time in battle will make Gilgamesh enter the interest peak state, where now for the rest of the battle he can only use his skill. Using skill will clear this unit's interest. His unique joint follow-up attack with Saber accumulates every time Gilgamesh or Saber attacks. Every attack is going to increase tally by 1. Reaching 8 tally will let Gilgamesh and Saber launch a joint follow-up attack, which does lightning damage of 400% of Gilgamesh's attack and wind damage of 600% of Saber's attack. Gilgamesh gets 3 interest, while Saber gets 120 fixed energy, with her next ultimate doing 200% of the original damage. Using the joint follow-up attack will reset the attack tally. His technique is a special dimension technique. Entering battle with it active will do lightning damage based off Gilgamesh's attack to all enemies and give Gilgamesh 3 interest. For bonus traces, his A2 gives Gilgamesh 2 interest when using ultimate, or if anyone on the team gives any form of ult, he also will get 2 interest, attack or not. But Gilgamesh will also gain a fixed amount of 30% of the energy consumed by teammates when they use their ultimate. A4 increases Gilgamesh's crit damage for every 1 point of interest gained by 25%, stacking up to 6 times. And his A6 increases the team's attack and crit damage by 20% while Gilgamesh is on the field, with an additional 1% for every 1 excess energy past 140, maximum of 100%. Finally, for his Eidolons, his E1 makes the King Acknowledgement's defense ignoring effect apply to the team, and King's Acknowledgement will additionally increase Gilgamesh's attack by 60%, and when Gilgamesh uses skill, he will additionally regenerate 40 fixed energy. E2 gives Gilgamesh 5 interest after entering combat, an additional 5 when using ultimate, and increase the damage multiplier of his skill against the primary target by 100%, adjusting targets 50%. E4 increases his energy regen by 20%. E6 increases the bounce damage multiplier of Enma Elish by 80%. Gilgamesh being on the field will increase the team's all-type res spend by 20%. Someone on the team using ultimate will give Gilgamesh a stack of golden rule, which stacks up to 3, and when Gilgamesh uses his ultimate, it will consume all golden rule, with each stack increasing the crit damage for that ultimate damage by 100%. For his best Lightcones, overall his best is his own signature, with 18% attack and 10% energy regen for the wear, an ultimate damage increase that goes up depending on the amount of energy consumed, with a maximum of a 72% increase. Entering combat or wear using ultimate gives the wear King's Entertainment for 3 turns, increasing the team's crit damage by 24%, and effects the same type cannot stack. So a bit of extra attack is nice. It's not a big focus since he does give himself a lot of attack in his base kit. Energy regen is an unfortunate part of this Lightcone because majority of the energy Gilgamesh does gain is fixed energy, be it through the ultimates of others, the E1. So energy regen doesn't actually impact that. So the fact that this gives energy regen and is probably the reason this Lightcone doesn't have other things or just higher values is because of the energy regen. So this is a bit unfortunate. Although a 72% increase to his biggest source of damage being his ultimate is a big increase, and it does have slight support capabilities, 24% crit damage. It's all right. It's just kind of there, but it's a buff nonetheless. So maintaining uptime, and overall it is a very solid Lightcone on him. It is the best performance no matter the investment, and also probably has the best art in the game. Other than that, you can also use Saber's Lightcone on him with 36% crit damage, 40% attack for the wear when they use ultimate. If max energy consumed is greater than 300, 10% of fixed amount of energy will be refunded, and the wear will gain an additional 40% attack for 2 turns. So 36% crit damage, 80% attack, and also 10% energy refund. It's a lot of stats. It is a bunch of attack. 80% attack is a lot, and then the extra crit damage is nice. So there is that, and also the bit of refund you are able to get lets you get ultimate slightly quicker. It's not as big as you think it would be, but you still can very much get it slightly quicker. So this would be the second best option you can use. I don't necessarily recommend this Lightcone to most people, and I'll get into why, but I can't deny that it is a good stat stick, and the effect is usable for the first 2. And that's Phyton's Lightcone with 12 base speed, 18% defense ignore, and mainly for this part, the Blazing Sun buff, which is able to increase the wear's damage up by 60%. The Lightcone giving the defense ignore and also very high base attack is the biggest kicker of this. The base speed increase is able to increase the speed you are able to get per interest point, but it really does not add up to anything that matters. Hence why I don't really focus on it much. The defense ignore, it's good, especially if it's helping you push into the higher values of around 80%. But this part, the way this works is not great because it is after the wearer uses ultimate, which Gilgamesh wants his ultimate to be buffed as that is his biggest source of damage. So this will be able to buff if you get like a joint follow-up attack in between, and that's kind of it, because he would use ultimate, and if you get a joint follow-up attack between that ultimate and the turn he would take, you would be able to get it. However, the moment he takes his turn, the buff is going to be gone, which is why I think this whole part being a focus is very much wasted, and the base speed is not much of a difference for him, which is why it is like two pretty useless effects. It's just mainly the defense ignore and high base attack. So if you don't have the other options available and you have a spare fine on Lightcones sitting around, then I guess. But honestly, it's something I just wanted to mention because I won't deny it does work, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it over at least the next option I'll talk about, which would be the Battle Pass Lightcone. A trail, 12% crit rate, and a 24% increase in skill and ultimate damage. S5, 20% crit rate, skill and ultimate damage 40%. Doesn't impact the joint follow-up attack, unfortunately, but one makes them a lot easier to build with 20% crit rate, and impacts a decent portion of his damage being the skill, and his biggest source of damage being the ultimate. 40% damage increases to that is very, very nice. The only downside is it being battle pass, so if you don't buy the battle pass you can't get this, but if you do, then there's a very, very strong option just sitting there. The classic Herder Shop Aeon Lightcone is also fine with 8% attack when the wearer attacks, stacking up to 4 times after the wearer breaks an enemy target's weakness. Damage done increases by 12% for 2 turns. S5, 16% attack per stack and 24% damage. So up to 64% attack and also 24% damage. Stacking it up is a bit on the slower side, but you can still get it up before you get too far into battle. And then also breaking an enemy target's weakness doesn't have to be too hard. Gilgamesh can do a lot of toughness, so it really depends if they have lightning weakness or not. So without the damage percent buff active, the performance would drop, but otherwise very solid free-to-play option. Now for Lightcones, there is a lot of situations where one could outperform the other. I'm gonna get the main one out of the way, which is the Quantum set. 10% defense ignore when doing damage to an enemy, and an additional 10% if they have Quantum weakness. So you're mainly looking at this when they have a Quantum weakness, because this can help you shoot up your defense ignore values, which also would depend on the team. Like if you have Mortanics on the team, if you have other characters on the team providing some defense ignore, or shred, and if this is actually pushing you up to those higher 70 to 100% values, then this can actually outperform the other sets. So in those cases, a Genius set could be the one to outperform the others. However, if you are running him on a team with E2 Mortanix Blade, then the other best set could be the Duke set, with the 2-piece increasing damage up by follow-up attacks by 20%, 4-piece when the wearer uses a follow-up attack, increases the wearer's attack by 6% every time the follow-up attack does damage, stacking up to 8 times, lasting for 3 turns, and is removed the next time the wearer uses a follow-up attack. So yes, you could use this on just a Saber Joint attack team without the E2 Mortanix, but then you're only going to be buffing that, so you miss out on a lot of ultimate damage and such, so you'd be better off using something else. However, with the E2 Mortanix, that's going to make the ultimate be considered a follow-up attack, which allows the 4-piece and the 2-piece to apply to the ultimate. Going to be a significant damage increase, and this would be the overall best in slot with E2 Mortanix. And he's able to fully stack it up and maintain the buff since it does last for 3 turns. And the joint follow-up attack plus ultimate, able to get practically the entire thing. So a lot of attack and some follow-up damage percent for both ultimate with E2 Mortanix and also the joint follow-up attack if that is active. Scholar is also a reliable set with the 8% crit rate from the 2-piece, 4-piece skill and ultimate damage by 20%, and an additional 25% for the next skill after the wearer uses ultimate. 2-piece makes him easier to build, with the 4-piece just increasing the main source of damage ultimate and also a bit of the skill. Unfortunately, there isn't a reverse Scholar, as I always say for characters like this where they deal ultimate damage a lot and mainly want to focus on that, but it's still a fine increase. Unfortunately, it doesn't impact the joint follow-up attack at all, as there's no follow-up damage increase, but it's still a very reliable set. You can also use Poet Set 4-piece on him for the 4-piece, decreasing the wearer's speed by 8%. Entering battle, if the wearer's speed is 110/95 before it, the wearer gains 20%/32% crit rate. So it also would make him a lot easier to build, as you need to focus a lot less on crit rate. You still need to get a good amount. You would need to build up to 68% to have that 100% in battle still, so there is rolls, but you can focus a lot more on like attack percent and crit damage and such. So if you have a really good 4-piece Poet laying around, you can also use this on him since he is able to get the full 32% since his base speed is low enough. For Planar Ornaments, his best in slot is going to be the Cosmic Life, which is able to increase damage if the wearer's max energy is greater than or equal to 200 for every 1 excess point. they gain 0.2% damage dealt up to max of 32%. Gilgamesh is able to fully stack this, so he gets a full 32% to all his damage for free. So this will impact his skill, his joint follow-up attack, his ultimate, health, his basic. It's just a free damage increase throughout the entirety of the battle. Specifically with E2 Mortanix, you can use Duran, which is able to increase the wearer's follow-up attack damage by 5% for each merit stack, which is gained by someone on the team using a follow-up attack. And then reaching 5 stacks, you would be able to get a 25% crit damage increase, so 25% increase to follow-up damage and 25% increase to crit damage. Very, very good increase, but this would also be something I only recommend if E2 Mortanix. You can also run the City of Converging Stars on him, which the wearer using a follow-up attack will increase attack by 24% for 2 turns. Enemy target getting defeated in the battle will increase the team's crit damage by 12% in the current battle. So you would need to mainly proc the joint follow-up attack. I only really recommend this on the Saber teams, as on something like a Blade Veil team, you would be using him as the main DPS, so you'd want to just focus more on damage in that case, where you'd be better off running something else, or maybe someone else would be running the set anyways. So if no one else is running the set on your Saber team, you can put this on Gilgamesh, as he is able to gain the effect. Since with the joint follow-up attack, he is able to gain the attack increase, and then you just need to defeat one enemy in the battle to give everyone 12% crit damage. If you have none of those, you can just use Salsado on him, 8% crit rate and 15% damage to wear his ultimate and follow-up attack. So ultimate will do more damage, the joint follow-up attack will do more damage as well. For the main stats on the relics, for the body, you want to run crit rate. For the feet, you want to run attack percent. For the orb, run lightning damage. And for the link rope, run attack percent. The subsets are simple. You just focus on crit rate. You need to get that to 100%. Missing out on 100% crit rate on Gilgamesh is going to be really, really bad. His ultimate just hits so hard, you want every hit to crit. And just in general, there's so many attacks that you just want all of them to crit. And in general, nowadays, you always see are going to want your DPS to always crit. So 100% crit rate is going to be the full focus. Don't worry if your attack and crit damage is lacking a bit, because he does give himself so much crit damage and attack thanks to his base kit, so you can very much focus on the crit rate instead. Once you get 100% crit rate, then you can focus on crit damage and attack percent. Good attack amount for Gilgamesh builds are looking around the 3700 range. If you can get around that, that's going to be really good. If you can shoot up higher than that, maybe even around 3900 to 4k with the lightning orb, that's going to be a little more on the unrealistic side, but if you can really get that, that's going to be very, very good. Before going into battle, for crit damage wise, if you can get around 130%, that's also going to be fine. But the main focus, no matter the role, is going to be that 100% crit rate. Then you would focus on the attack and crit damage. So 100% crit rate, then around 3700 attack, then around 130% crit damage. That would kind of be the focus, with the attack and crit damage having the same priority, but the crit rate having much more higher priority. Now for some general team building ideas. Gilgamesh primarily has 2 teams. First one being the teams with Saber, of course, as this is going to be what most people are running him on. So the 2 slots would be taken up by the dual kings. Third slot would go to an amplifier. The 2 competitive slots right now are either Mortanix or RMC, with Mortanix pulling ahead slightly at earlier investment like E1, E2, Saber, and Gilgamesh, as they are doing more on the equal side damage. So Gilgamesh and Saber get equal amount of buffing from Mortanix Blade. However, with like high Saber investment and lower sided Gil investment, such as like E1, E2 Gil, and like E6 Saber, that's when RMC does pull ahead, because Saber is going to be doing majority of the damage. So the mem action advance plus the true damage is going to do a lot. So in this case, I'll just put Mortanix Blade. And the best sustain for this team is always going to be Huohuo. So you always want to run Huohuo on this team, as her energy is just so good for both Gilgamesh and Saber. She's able to provide that massive attack buff to both of them as well. Her energy can also help out whoever the amplifier slot is here. And honestly, this team does a lot better with having Huohuo as opposed to sustain this. But if you are doing sustain this, then instead you could also just put the RMC slot there, or more general options like Tribi. You can even combine the 2 teams Gilgamesh has by running Blade Veil with the Kings, so on and so forth. And then the other team would be on the one with Blade Veil, where this one functions more as a wheelchair in a sense for a quote-unquote main DPS Gilgamesh, with the last slot going to sustain here, which obviously would also go to Huohuo, but Hyacine can also outperform on this team. So just use whichever one is free, which is most likely going to be Huohuo, since Hyacine is always in demand for anyone that has other HP scalers. So the Blade Veil team could look like this. If you're missing Ashvale specifically, then you'd have to sub out for someone like Tribi, or you can even use OG Silverwolf if you ever E1 for those one-turn ultimates. She might not have the highest energy requirement, but she is able to ult so frequently that it's able to help Gilgamesh quite a bit throughout the battle, so that's why I do recommend it. So those would be other options. You could also just slot in Welt, as this would also activate Blade's ultimate buff for the team instead, so Gilgamesh ult can hit harder, while Blade himself would do slightly less damage for the team. And that is the full release of Gilgamesh Guide. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like, we really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel and haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell for future videos like this along with all the tips and all content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.